Okay, before we get into it today, another update from the Angle Homeschool Academy. I've got star student Charlotte Angle here. Charlotte, how's it going?
Good.
It's good. How was this week in school?
It was great.
What, did you learn anything?
Not really.
Attributable to your horrible teacher, I'm sure.
Yep.
So what's one thing you did that you enjoyed?
Art.
Art. What did you draw?
Animals.
What's your favorite animal?
A fox.
Awesome. So the governor said this week that we might, schools might reopen. How do you feel about that?
Great, because I finally would be able to see my friends.
Well, I think all of us would like that, provided that it's safe. Charlotte, thanks for stopping by, and get outside.
Bye!
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana College of Business. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in this week. We have the COVID Collab reassembled today, and right off the bat, we've got special guest star, University of Montana President Seth Bodnar. Seth, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, sir. It's great to be here. I don't know about the guest star status, but guest, perhaps I can accept.
Well, we'll see. Maybe over the next few minutes, you can live up to the guest star moniker. I certainly think you can. So, Seth, the university has kind of been at the center of crisis management in this situation, rapidly mobilizing a transition to remote instruction and so forth, and trying to do things to ensure the safety and health of the community, both faculty, staff, students, and their families. Let's talk about maybe the process that you've gone through to think about the university's role in coping with coronavirus over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It has been a whirlwind of a couple of months here. It's hard to believe it's coming up on May, and the last basically 2 months have just flown by. But you're right. A university, especially in a community like Missoula, is so kind of enmeshed in the community in so many different ways. And so when you face a challenge like COVID-19 that really upends so much of our community, the university has both the challenge to adapt in a coordinated way with the community, but also the obligation, I think, to play an important role in not just responding to, but helping to address this challenge as a community. So, as we've proceeded through this, it has really been, important for us, yes, to focus in on how we're operating as a campus, the steps that we're taking, but also what role we're playing in our community here in Missoula and across the state to really help address the immediate and longer term implications of this pandemic. So it's been certainly an interesting couple of months.
And I would assume this sort of experience has been one that, being in it, you can tap into a lot of your previous experiences, be it from the military, be it from your corporate experience with GE. Not to suggest you're in your element, but this is a novel situation. But some of the principles of leadership that you draw from, I think, have got to be somewhat familiar right now, I would expect.
Yeah. Well, there's very little that's familiar right now. But I think there's no playbook for this. But I will say, to your point, I have drawn upon thinking about, all right, how do leaders in any kind of crisis not just get sucked down into what do I need to think about right now, but what do I need to get thinking about or have others thinking about that's going to be really important for us 2 weeks from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now. And so one of the things I've really tried to focus on for myself and for our campus over the course of this past month is to make sure that we are planning, as I tell folks, really on 3 horizons. There's this immediate kind of 4 inches in front of our face set of problems and challenges and opportunities you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And over the first month or so, it was, all right, we've got this emerging pandemic. How do we steadily lock down portions of the university to prevent the spread. And we can talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things we did there. But and that, really consumes, I'll call it more than 100% of your leadership time, right? It's 120% of your time, because you're working at about 150% of your time at least. But about a month ago, I said, we've got to really focus on that immediate term effort, but we've got to get some folks together to start thinking about what do we need to be starting on in the next couple of weeks to be prepared for 6 months from now. So we stood up a team, a cross-sector mission-based team, to focus on, I'll call it those near to medium term efforts. And over the course of this week, we're actually going to be forming a university design team to start thinking intentionally about what we want to look like on the other side of this. And that in some ways can feel overwhelming. But at the same time, critically important for us to be proactive in shaping our future, and not just letting other events determine it for us.
Yeah, you would think a lot of the talk has been about, the various kinds of enrollment shocks that higher education will experience or are predicted to experience. However, at the same time, this seems like the sort of crisis facing a society that universities can play a major role in being a part of the solution. I mean, you've used the analogy of water. It's not really an analogy, but the issue of water as a way to illustrate how a university like University of Montana can really contribute to a big societal issue with a lot of different dimensions. And this is similar, how we as a society recover from this. How are you thinking about the role of a public university like the University of Montana in leading through the recovery from this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and again, something that we take our role as a flagship university very, very seriously. And so as we think about each of these planning horizons, there is really an on-campus component to that planning, as well as an operations, as well as a community component. And so take this, I'll call it our immediate time horizon. All right, our focus over the past 7 weeks has really been, all right, what do we need to do to protect the health and safety of our students and the broader community, while enabling our students to continue to learn and make progress in their academic program. So from an on-campus standpoint, that meant a massive transformation in how we teach, moving over 4,000 course sections to remote delivery, telling our faculty members that, look, you're used to teaching one way, we need you to switch. And we did some prep for that. We were prepping some folks in anticipation of that about 3 weeks before we actually had to do that. And then we had to say to our students, look, living in a residence hall, it's really tough to practice social distancing in a residence hall without adequate testing capacity, without a great ability to do effective contact tracing. And so we dramatically reduced the number of students in the residence halls, around 68 students in residence halls right now. We said to our campus, you have to move to remote work wherever possible. We canceled events. And really basically curtailed nearly all of the human interaction and activities that is typical of a campus. Mm-hmm. And then from a community standpoint, you think about it purely from a science standpoint, and you look at something like our Center for Translational Medicine, which led by Dr. Jay Evans, and just frankly world-leading expertise in vaccine development and immunotherapy. And they'd been working on an opioid vaccine and doing a lot of other great work. And in the midst of this, really shifted gears and frankly just announced a $2.5 million grant from the NIH to expand some of their work on the vaccine for COVID-19. And in fact, they're working with researchers from Mount Sinai in New York, as well as Boston Children's. And the path to a COVID-19 vaccine, believe it or not, is going to flow right here through the University of Montana. So you've got world-leading science there. And then you've got some of our other scientists on a more local level who said, like Regents Professor Rich Bridges, whose lab typically is focused on neuroscience and studying Alzheimer's, quickly converted his lab in response to community need for hand sanitizer and started producing hand sanitizer for first responders. Uh, and then to community health issues. So our Center for Population Health Research, in fact, just also received an NIH grant, this one for almost $11 million, led by Dr. Curtis Noonan. And they've been focused on public health challenges unique to a rural state like Montana. So at the state level, Professor Aaron Landgruth has been working directly with the state epidemiologist, Laura Williamson, on the models for the state. And at the local level, another researcher, Aaron Simmons, is working with the Missoula County Health Department on profiling and modeling of the outbreak here. And I would tell you, but when I talked with state leaders, and last week I spent 4 days in Helena with the governor's task force and with the governor, and I spend every day at least once talking to our community leaders here, and it's enormously makes me feel enormous pride to be a part of this community when I hear these local and state leaders say thank you to the University of Montana. They have been fantastic on a public health standpoint, a science standpoint, and then on a business standpoint. You know, Justin, you're a faculty member in the College of Business, and it's been great to see our College of Business step up through the BEAR program, which stands for Business Emergency Assistance and Recovery, really through our Blackstone Launchpad and our Accelerate Montana efforts, working with Grant and his team at MEP to help small businesses in the community navigate resources available, as well as the Bureau for Business and Economic Research, which of course Bryce knows a great deal about already, looking at the economic impact. So just over the past 6 weeks, it's been really exciting to see how our team has not just fulfilled this education and research mission, but really has stepped up to help lead in our communities and our state's response to this pandemic. I tell you, I've never faced a more challenging situation in my life. But I've also never been more proud to be a part of a team like this at the University of Montana.
It's great to hear that, you know, an institution can move quickly when the moment demands it. And it does feel like our institution has been able to mobilize and really meet the demands of the challenge with a lot of grace and a lot of sort of good spirit. So it's been great to be a part of that. And it's been great to sort of experience your leadership through that. You mentioned a little bit about some of the more future oriented planning, whether it's summer or more beyond that into the fall and next year. Do you have any kind of notions about what life will look like on the other side? Like what the fall looks like, or, you know, what sort of principles you're sort of thinking about with regard to how we perhaps repackage our core product of education?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Something we've been spending a lot of time on. I mentioned I spent 4 days in Helena last week, working a bit with some state leaders and the governor on thinking about how do we steadily, how do we increasingly get back to at least some semblance of normalcy while effectively managing the spread of this pandemic. You know, so I think we have a challenging year ahead of us as a global society, frankly. And as we think about it from a university standpoint, you know, the key for us is really for our campus. We want to enable in-person learning as best we can for our students. It's one of the things that makes the University of Montana special, that personal interaction. But we realize we have to do that in a way that minimizes risk to our students, to our faculty members, to our staff, to our community. And so we're working through plans on that right now. And so developing additional measures to better understand the prevalence of the virus on our campus, to better manage and mitigate its spread. So we're looking at ways to better again, enhance our testing protocols on campus, as well as our ability to do contact tracing through technology, through infrastructure. We're looking at ways we can hold classes while enabling social distancing. And so, you know, this fall will certainly not be back to quote unquote normal, but we're working to do everything we can over what I'd call the medium term. So, in other words, the next year, to adapt and provide that in-person instruction, again, in a risk mitigating way, but to enable our students to continue to learn, because that's so important through this. A lot of our students, simply don't have access to some of the technology and
Right.
infrastructure. And so, existing equity gaps that we've seen already, I think we're seeing this across society is that this crisis is really widening equity gaps that already existed, and it's really important for us as an institution who sees its mission really as to foster inclusive prosperity, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that all of our students can continue learning, and that the result of this crisis is not a massive widening in equity gaps that already exist. So it's a challenge, but it's so important over the course of the next year to do that. Over the longer run, I shared with our campus this week. I said, it's in some ways, with everything we've got going on right now, the day-to-day work of managing a public health crisis, the challenge of thinking how you adapt a university to operate over the course of the next year to 18 months in the age of COVID, before there's a virus or an effective therapeutic. One might ask, well, what in the heck are you thinking, trying to plan for the longer term future? And I guess while I can understand that perspective and at times feel it myself, I think it's imperative that we work hard to examine now, how do we need to adapt over the longer run? This is a 127-year-old institution, and I share with our colleagues, that we're the fortunate beneficiaries of the work of previous generations who've guided through challenges in the past, and now it's our turn to be thoughtful, to be strategic, to be courageous, to design and think about those continued and as well as those new characteristics that should embody a flagship university for the future. And so that's we formed a university design team that will spend the coming months looking and thinking about how we can best position the University of Montana for long-term success and impact. In that core mission of not just fostering inclusive prosperity, but expanding the reaches of knowledge and frankly sustaining our democracy. So it's a big mission we have, and it's one that we have to adapt. And so I'm really looking forward to the work of that team.
Absolutely. Yeah, that aspiration is certainly exciting. And, Bryce and I have had extensive conversations on this podcast about the future of work and how higher education should be designed to meet the needs of the future of work. You mentioned those the notions of inequity, whether it's with access to technology or on a bunch of other dimensions. I mean, the demands of the workforce and the demands of the citizenry are going to be different on the other side of this. We could be looking at, people that are underemployed and need to figure out some skills to get to full employment. We could be looking at, people that need to come back and finish up the degree after delay. So plenty of different changing needs, and it's exciting to sort of hear about the university taking steps to really be thoughtful about what it should look like in the future. Seth, before we wrap, I want to make sure that others on the panel have a chance to jump in with questions. Susan, do you have a question for President Bodnar?
No, I have a comment.
You have a comment? Well, comments are welcome.
Seth, I hear you when you talk about sort of the resilience and the longevity of the university, because I feel like our United Way, which is going to be 90 years old next year, this is really going to change us as an organization. I feel like we're in the same boat, committed to the same values, but figuring out how to navigate that uncertain future. And I just have to say that the Grizz esports team last Sunday raised $100,000, over $100,000 for United Way through their Twitch live stream. I don't even know what I'm talking about because I'm not an esports person, but I was so impressed by these young people and their community spirit and Professor Michael Casson. So when you talk about public health and science and business, it's that, and it's also students who really evidenced such care and concern for their community. It just blew me away. And as I said, I know nothing about esports, but these student athletes have become major supporters of their community.
They sure have, Susan. I'm so glad to hear that. You know, we talk a lot here at the university of this idea of the family, and that this is a university that really has a deep sense of family and really has at its core this idea of inclusivity. And I will tell you, one of the, I think, most heartwarming developments over the course of this past year has been to see this esports team grow. You start thinking about it, and in the first year, it's like, oh gosh, e-gaming, video games. What are we doing? And then, as you start to learn more about it, obviously gaming and game design has such an impact on so many aspects of our life right now. And so there's so many various applications where the skills these young people are developing can be deployed. But then you also, and these young people are so amazing. The shirts, if you've seen them that they wear, their team shirts say every game, everybody, and it says every game, everybody, everyone. So this is a way for people of all abilities, all physical abilities, to participate in a competitive activity. And they have as one of their core values this idea of inclusivity. And it's interesting. We actually had as part of our President's Lecture series, an expert from MIT
Mm-hmm.
on gaming come and speak last fall. And she was so amazed. She said, I've actually, and she studies this trend of online gaming and the fact that, Boston's, the Celtics arena has been filled watching the World Championships of
I think like more people watch that than the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. And she was so struck and so complimentary of the diversity, the culture of this esports team here at the university. So, Professor Cassons has just done a phenomenal job, and I've been so proud of our students and the way they've really built this wonderful culture. So thank you for sharing that.
And just one more quick comment on that. The way that and it was so obvious that this is stressed, talked about the whole person. We're building leaders, we're building character, where we are, these are student athletes. It's not just about gamers. And then just the way that we sometimes stereotype people who play video games as disconnected loners. It just blew that stereotype up in a really great way. So anyway, thank you for fostering that culture.
Awesome. Well, before we close, Seth, if you have a couple extra minutes, I think we got a time for a question from Bryce. If you have one, Bryce.
Sure. So Seth, as you let's focus on the medium-term planning. The challenge of this particular crisis is that we started off in an information environment of we knew very little, and we still know very little, but we learn more every week. And obviously, for the plans that you guys are creating, it's costly to start planning for a future that may or may not come to pass, or may get, new information may come that shifts it. So what kind of flexibility are you building into the plans? Are there key decision points, key timelines that, kind of make it so that, going to live instruction, we're committed to it or we can't reverse it? So how are you kind of planning or, dealing with, I guess, the uncertainty or the fact that new information is coming so rapidly?
It's a great point, Bryce. And frankly, this team that I've pulled together, I said, I'll be perfectly frank with you. Some of the plans that you're going to develop, we're going to throw away because we can't use them. But if you don't develop multiple plans, you won't be ready. And so we are planning for various scenarios depending on the continued evolution of the pandemic, as we learn more, as we see other developments come into play here. So you're exactly right. The way this mission-based team is really structured, it is looking at multiple scenarios and looking at how we will accomplish the core tasks of the university under each of those scenarios. And so you're right, it's a challenge, but I've shared with the team, we'll need to, and we're planning to be back in person for the fall, again with some modifications for sure, but we'll need to make a call, right, midsummer about it. All right, how's this going to work? How's moving? How dorm's going to be set up? What are we going to do? And if we wait until the time to make the call to start our planning for the various scenarios that we could be operating under, we won't have enough time. So you're right, it is costly in terms of time, but you really don't have much of a choice to do that. And so it's a challenge, and we're learning more every day. And really the key here, again, and until we get to a vaccine, until we get to, or an effective therapeutic, we really have to think about this and our ability to operate as a university in terms of our ability to understand the prevalence of the virus in our community and on our campus, and when we see it, to be able to prevent further spread, right, through quarantine and isolation and effective contact tracing. So as those things develop, our ability to conduct operations will also change. But you're right, we're planning under multiple scenarios. We talk about the education mission, but you think about a Grizz football game, and what does that look like? You think about a concert. What does that look like? And so these are big questions, obviously, that a lot of different campuses and a lot of aspects of the global economy are wrestling with as well. And yeah, it's a lot of planning, a lot of which will be put on the shelf and not relevant. But really, we really have no choice but to plan for multiple scenarios.
Well, Seth, I really appreciate you spending some time with us on a Friday afternoon. One of the favorite things I have about sort of old school talk radio was the crosstalk between shows. And we're transitioning to our next guest, who's a fantastic member of this community, also a alum, Charlie Beaton from Big Dipper fame. Charlie, you had your hand up a moment ago. Did you have a question for Seth before he escapes?
Yeah, I did. I just had a quick question. I've been talking to some other friends about this, but I was wondering if you felt like there was some enrollment opportunities this fall with the University of Montana. I have a college-age daughter who goes to school out of state, and there's a lot of her friends that go out of state or back east. A lot of their schools are talking about not having classes in the fall, and I just wondering if that was an enrollment opportunity for the university.
Yeah,
Charlie,
kids. It's a great question, and it is both. And I've shared this with our community leaders. I've been in touch with MCPS Superintendent Rob Watson. I think it's both an opportunity and an obligation, because there's so much uncertainty right now, and students and parents are thinking hard about, okay, well, maybe my plan was to go to school back east, go out of state, or maybe that's where I am right now. But especially given the state of the pandemic in other parts of the country, as well as this idea of being far away from home, it's changing a lot of people's thinking. And there's a tendency, I think, for some to sit out a year. You hear people say, well, maybe I'll take a gap year. And frankly, this is about the worst time in the world to take a gap year, because the typical internships aren't available. Travel is severely limited, so a lot of these students are thinking, well, okay, if my other plans were on hold, boy, well, what do I do? And my point, and to students, and we've been having multiple virtual town halls here for the Missoula community and the broader Montana community, and my message to students is, you got to keep on learning. Okay, do not put your entire life on hold while we wait for this. So even if your plans are slightly modified, don't sit around and wait. Make some progress. Even if you weren't planning to come to UM, take some classes with us. We'll help with that transfer process. Or if you're at another school and you might want to sit back, we'll take a few classes here. It'll free up some time for you later when things settle down, when you can do that gap year. So I'd say to your daughter, if she's if she's concerned about heading back east, take some classes with us. We'll have some in-person options. We'll have some remote options. She can continue to make progress. It's interesting things about humans, right? And I think maybe a good metaphor here is to think about swimming. I was a special forces officer and had to command a dive team, an underwater operations team, and go through the special operations dive school, which was just miserable. But one of the things you have to do a lot there is tread water. And I don't know if you all would agree with me, but treading water for 5 minutes is actually in many ways harder than swimming for 5 minutes. And I think psychologically and even spiritually, it weighs on you to tread water, right? To wait things out. And when you can be moving towards something, making some progress, it's a lot better for you mentally, for you spiritually. And that's in some ways a message that I've shared with students, and what I would encourage parents as well. Look, I realize there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now. Maybe your college plans are your typical plans are on hold, but get started, or don't just pause your education. Continue to make some progress. Do it with us. We will help you transition, and that's obviously important for us from an enrollment standpoint. But more importantly, I think that's really important for students and for families as well. This is not a short-term situation for our society, and we can't hold our breath for the next year to a year and a half until we have a vaccine. And that's, again, optimistic projection. So we're trying to do everything we can to best serve our students. But back to the earlier point, we're thinking about our broader community as well.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
I'm Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Absolutely. Well, Seth, thanks for stopping by, sharing
thank you very much.
Yeah. And I look forward to our next encounter, hopefully in person at some point. And keep doing what you're doing. We really appreciate it.
All right. You all as well. Thank you, Bryce and Susan and Charlie. It's awesome to see you virtually. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Thank you,
Right
Seth.
back at you. Bye.
Okay. So great to hear from University of Montana President Seth Bodnar, joined now by esteemed member of Governor Bullock's Coronavirus Relief Fund Task Force, Charlie Beaton of Big Dipper fame, University of Montana fame, VTO fame. You give us some music for the show, the little known fact among listeners. That's some of Charlie and his cohort's music. Charlie, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this, I'm sure that Bryce and Susan have questions for you as well. And the context of these questions changes a little bit in, when we think about it within the notion of the easing of some of the restrictions the governor put on the economy. What is this task force and what is your job?
Sure. Well, the task force is basically the federal government is going to be handing over about $1.25 billion to Governor Bullock by supposedly about right now. And so he needs a directive on how to spend this money. This money has to be spent by the end of the year, by December 30th. If it's not all spent, it has to be paid back. So they're looking at hopefully spending all of this. And so he put together a task force of about 24 people, a very diverse group of people, a lot of small business owners. There's legislators on it. There's a little bit of everybody on this. So it's a really neat group of people. And so we've been meeting on a regular basis, talking about how this money can be spent to help people that are in, a pretty dire situation right now.
Yeah, and so this is part of the CARES Act. And how is it different than some of the money that's already been distributed, whether it's through the CARES Act whether it's through the PPP program or other dimensions of the legislation? How is this money different, and what is it designed to do?
Yeah. Well, the money is different in that it cannot replicate anything that the CARES Act is already doing. So it can't be the same as PPP money or anything else that's funneling out of the CARES Act. So that's the question: is what do we do with this money? We've been waiting, and one of the frustrating things is a week ago we were supposed to get the federal guidelines, what we can and can't do with this money, and we didn't actually get that until yesterday. But some of those things I can just kind of read off to you. Is that the money needs to be used to cover costs which are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public emergency with respect to COVID-19. They cannot be accounted for in the recent budget that was approved for the CARES Act. So it can't, like I just said, it can't replicate what it's already done. And also it has to be for things that has incurred between March 1st and December 30th. So that kind of helped narrow things down a little bit, because there was talk about some different infrastructure things that it could be used for, but really it needs to be emergency funds for things that have been happening right now.
Sure. And so, how's the committee functioning? Are you spinning up an application process, trying to distribute that information about who qualifies and who doesn't? And what are kind of the channels of your communications at this point?
Sure.
Other than this awesome podcast.
Yeah, this is helpful. There's been through the website, they've been collecting public comment, and as of yesterday had over 1,000 comments, and we have access to read all those. And the staff is spending a ton of time going over absolutely every comment, and people should feel good that if they made comments that people are reading it and hopefully taking some action on it, and it's being considered. But as a committee, some of us have been going into different groups. I formed a group with 4 other small business owners that are on the task force. And we're working on some recommendations that we're going to deliver to this committee and to the governor, hopefully by Monday morning, with respect to helping small business owners, especially people that have fallen through the cracks, people that the PPP didn't work for, and kind of everybody, that's all the business owners that are being affected.
What are you hearing on the street here, Charlie? I mean, you run a business in town that's been severely affected by this, and you're a high-profile member of the community as far as your relationship to other business owners. What's kind of the ground truth of some of these programs? What are you hearing?
I think that I'm hearing is the PPP is not working well for a lot of people in retail and restaurant. I think it came out really quickly, and I think the idea was that here's some money, and in 2 months we're back to normal, and this will cover you. But the reality now, as we know, is that we aren't going to be back to normal in 8 weeks. Restaurants and retail, we're already seeing it with the restrictions lifted, where they're talking about restaurants maybe will only be at 50% capacity, or a hair salon still can't be open, or if you own a retail store, you have limited capacity. There's all those things, and those aren't going to be resolved in 8 weeks. We're going to be dealing with this for a while. So the hard part for a lot of people is that money is, you have to use. So the PPP money is, maybe you guys know, is 75% of it has to be used for payroll, and you need to continue that payroll. Well, if you got PPP money and you have a restaurant, and June rolls around and you can only be at 50% capacity, how are you going to keep your payroll going? So that what happens is you have to pay that money back, part of that money. So I think that's what's giving a lot of business owners a lot of anxiety. For my business, it'll work okay for us, because one, we can still be open a little in a limited capacity, and by summertime we expect to be busy just by the nature of the business we're in. So So it'll work for us and it'll work for some businesses, but a lot of people are going to have some trouble with it.
Yeah, you're going to have to figure out some crowd management techniques. I mean, we hit an 80-degree day here in town, Charlie, and that line, if their people are 6 feet apart, is going to be out to Frenchtown, I would assume, which is a good problem to have, I suppose.
Yeah, we're painting some blue squares 6 feet apart, and they might have to go around the block. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of other cool businesses around the block that they could stomp in on their weight. So you said this money is designed to sort of meet some of the needs of the people that fell between the cracks. You said you're going to be issuing some recommendations on Monday. Can you give us a sense of the flavor of the principles that guide those recommendations?
Yeah, the first thing we talked about a week ago was immediate safety net. So they're kind of like putting these things in buckets. So you're looking at immediate safety net, business stabilization, tourism and hospitality, and then also state and local government, economic assistance, and then also the unforeseen impact. So we're putting everything in buckets, and that's how things are kind of being organized. So immediate safety net is like, how do we help people that could potentially just go out of business if they don't get some help. And they're looking at a little bit of everything. And it's a lot because it's food safety, it's mental health, it's small businesses, it's affecting absolutely everybody right now.
Well, Charlie, thank you for being willing to serve on that important committee, to be a good steward of these funds that are going to meet the needs of many people in need in our state. And being a champion for food service in this city and beyond. Yeah, thanks for stopping by the pod and sharing some of your wisdom with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I feel like, I just want to say that I feel like Montanans are in good hands. The people in the governor's office are working really hard to help people, and I think you're going to see it.
Awesome. Well, as we turn to Bryce and Susan for sort of some of the breakdown of the week's events, I feel like the most salient thing to talk about are Governor Bullock's recent orders to kind of ease some of the restrictions. Bryce, let's start with you. Last week, we talked a little bit about the problematic framing of reopening. Let's revisit that. You contend that reopening is the wrong vocabulary. It's the wrong sort of conception of what we should be thinking about. How should we be thinking about the moves we take to reengage in economic activity here?
So the problem with it is it invokes this idea of a switch, right? That we flip the switch and things kind of go back to normal. And obviously, if you read the governor's order, it says nothing of the sort, right? It's basically, the shelter in place or stay at home. I don't know what we call it here in Montana. I've gotten confused, but whatever it is that's keeping us at home and closed non-essential businesses, we're relaxing that. And so we're giving people more freedoms. And so I've been thinking about it since we were talking about it before we started. And maybe the better way of thinking about it is not as a switch, but as a dimmer, right? It's a knob. And basically what's going to happen is we're going to turn that knob up and down until we reach, some sort of equilibrium with a vaccine or a therapeutic. And so, it's going to be I think that's the way I'm going to use now is it's a knob. And right now we turned the knob basically as far to the left as we could, shut everything down except for essential services. But now we're going to turn it up a little bit. We're going to turn the lights up a little bit and we're going to see what happens. And hopefully, we will figure out how to contain the virus. But if it should reemerge, my guess is that we'll have to turn the dimmer back to the left a little bit.
Yeah, I like that framing, Bryce, the dimmer. And as we think about sort of turning it one way or the other, Susan, I'm thinking about an issue that you bring to the conversation frequently, and that's about equity. As you start to allow more economic activity, more interaction, more engagement. This is going to affect people differently. Disadvantaged groups included. How are you thinking about a lot of the constituents you work with as we start to reemerge from this and turn that dimmer switch, as Bryce puts it?
Yeah, I wish I had answers. I just would say that vulnerable people who are disadvantaged and suffered inequities before COVID-19 are even more adversely affected by the pandemic. You know, poor people experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, seniors. There's no end to the list, right? And I just think that I like the dimmer switch because I think it's a pretty dim idea to do things too quickly. And you and I talked earlier, Justin, about is there an opportunity now to address systems change going forward that will address things like social isolation and mental health and lack of access to technology, and the fact that we really weren't taking care of people who are experiencing homelessness adequately before the pandemic. And now that's just an even worse situation. And just the economic impact of people who have had trouble filing for unemployment or haven't even had the technology to be able to do it. So I think there are a lot of people in my sector who are thinking about those things and about the expenditures of the $1.25 billion. I think we're in a bit of a, I don't know if delicate situation is the right term, but I think that the nonprofit sector, it's important for us to acknowledge the pain and suffering of the small business sector, which provides so much support to our sector. And I don't want us to be seen as, you have to do everything for us. Because I think that would just create enmity and bad feelings. I think we have to acknowledge the pain and suffering of the small business sector while at the same time advocate for our own sector. I think that's kind of a run-on answer for which I apologize.
No, that makes sense. And the fact that nonprofits employ so many people and do so much good for the community can't be lost in all of this. One of the things as you were saying that, Susan, the concept of acceleration is one that this coronavirus crisis has really made salient to me. It's an acceleration. It's an accelerant of so many different trends in our society. And as we turn the dimmer on, it's almost an accelerant of some forms of inequality, right? The people for whom it's safe to go back to work or have the health capacity to maybe take on a little bit more risk. Those are the people that are going to be in a position where they can make money again. And a lot of the people that are in the categories at most risk, whether they're older or they have a pre-existing health condition or they're in a job that doesn't allow it, those people who can't get back to work are going to continue to suffer from lack of income and lack of ability to change that. And so, it raises big questions about how we design a society, and should we be thinking about different policies as we turn the switch? Bryce, that's a big question, policy, but have you thought about that? How turning on that switch is going to exacerbate different forms of inequality?
Oh, it absolutely. So there was a survey that came out, I don't know, sometime this week. It's called the Igm Survey. It's basically, they survey all the grand poobahs of academic economics.
How do I get that title? Grand Poobah of Academics?
I don't know. You get a fancy title somewhere.
Do I get a jacket or something?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, usually they do this, they survey these people on all sorts of issues all the time. And, as usual, you see some amount of disagreement. But I think there was 100% agreement that this crisis is exacerbating inequality. And we already seeing it, but we're going to see it even more significantly as we start to open up. And, the governor has said to vulnerable people, stay home, continue to stay home. And he's directed employers to grant them special accommodation. but that's 1 in 3 of our workers are in the, over 65 or have one of the various conditions that he's laid out. And then you say, well, what if schools don't open? Well, if schools don't open, that's another 1 in 4 workers. Now there's some overlap between the two groups, but 1 in 4 Montana workers have a child of, I'm going to use 13 as the, I can, leave you home alone, but have a child less than age 13, and 100% of the adults in the household are working. Now, that's from the pre-times. So, obviously there's going to be some of those that are unemployed currently, but, most of that 25% are likely to still be employed, and it's still going to have to be juggling childcare and work. And, how this all plays out, whether you can have an economy function when you have this much of your workforce that's basically trying to do all things to all people, it's going to be ugly. And yeah, some people might actually manage to come out ahead through this, but it's going to be a small number. And so the challenge of not being able to get into a room together is we need to start getting in rooms together and with facilitated conversation, working through our issues. Because what's happening is, what we're seeing is, we're all becoming more aware of the problems. We're seeing some of the underlying inequality in ways that we maybe had been blind to before. Mm-hmm. And so our desire, is to say, we need to help people. But at the same time, scarcity of resources is binding in a way that most of us have probably never experienced, in terms of your own individual resources because you've lost your job or you've had to take a pay cut, the government resources because state and local government, their tax revenue depends on all the other activity. If you're a business owner, whether or not you're going to be able to survive. So all of, there's these two forces. We need to help people, and yet our ability to help people is limited. And that means that we have to start making choices about who we help with the limited resources available to us, right? I mean, that's basically what Charlie and his committee are having to do. Mm-hmm. And there's enormous demand, not enough supply. And it's an unfortunate reality of our society over the course of my adult life is that we haven't invested enough in the trust and the relationships to be able to have conversations and be able to trust that people are always doing the right thing, and to be able to accept if I don't win. Because if I don't win, I'm going to go to Twitter and I'm going to be like, these people are awful and they're evil and whatever it is. And that's not going to be good for the social solidarity that we're going to need to try and make it through this. And so it's tough. I am optimistic because everybody's trying to do the right thing, but I am pessimistic because I am concerned about how much sniping and animosity, even in minor little things, like you see out on the trails, or you see when somebody isn't engaging in social distancing the way that you think that social distancing should be engaged in. Right. It's a bit concerning, and I get we're all stressed out. It's all very tense, but it's difficult to kind of work through that when you can't bring people together and facilitate kind of that conversation to get to we can at least agree on 90% of this, and let's go forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the themes that's emerged over the course of these conversations is that the group here, the consensus seems to be more bullish about the prospects for working through some of these issues at the local level than it is at the national level. I mean, I think when that announcement from Governor Bullock's office came out Wednesday, I think it was, I mean, it felt to me like my gut reaction was, wow, that sooner than expected. But at the same time, we've gotten pretty consistent and clear communication from the governor's office. So it felt like, I had some goodwill to trust that the recommendation was the right one and trust it. It's unclear, I say what you want about the national level leadership we have, but it has not been as consistent. Let's put it that way. And that contributes to some of this sort of sniping, a lot of the sniping, the Bryce, that you talk about. Susan, when you think about working through some of the tough issues that Bryce was laying out there, having these sorts of conversations, I mean, you're a leader that operates in this space a lot. I mean, sort of adjudicating right and wrong between the haves and have-nots. I mean, that's maybe more pithy than it should be, but Yeah. How do you approach those? Like, how would you encourage leaders to navigate right now?
Can't really talk because I'm in a corner with the blankets over my head right now after listening to Bryce.
Come on out. It's a Friday afternoon. The sun is out.
Dr. Doom, I think is my
Dr. Doom.
The dismal
right.
scientist. You
the
dubbed
dismal
yourself
scientist.
that the other week.
Yeah, I do agree that the sort of climate that we're living in now of just tremendous incivility has not stood us in good stead, but it is all the more reason why we should be glad that we're living in Montana. And maybe that is, having thought about your question for 5 seconds, I of course have the perfect answer, but beginning, and it sounds so corny, but I am the Jewish Pollyanna, beginning with ourselves and how we relate to people, concentrating on focusing outward rather than inward. And really, I know that sounds so corny, but one person at a time, and also calling upon our government to continue to be responsive to the needs of the people, trying not to demonize the opposition. And I think in this, and I just had this conversation earlier today on a Montana Nonprofit Association town hall talking about the governor's task force. My colleague Liz Moore serves on the same task force that Charlie Beaton serves on. And I think we need to focus on 100% of what we can get rather than 100% of what we want, and be prepared to think with an institutional ego about what's best for the whole rather than what is best for our sector. And it is not going to be easy, especially for somebody like me who operates from an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality. Mm-hmm. So what sent me into the corner was Bryce's very real wake-up call about the scarcity of resources. But I'm just going to keep tilting at that windmill, I think, and try to operate from a position of, I say I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, I'm a possibilist, and trying to operate from that space. Otherwise, I really will stay on the corner with the blankets over my head.
Well, I think the possibilist position is the best one to have right now. And that seems like a good sort of motivation to help get you out of the corner, Susan. Let's transition to our closing thoughts on what we're excited about, what we're thankful for. Charlie, I see you're still on the call, so hopefully you can chime in. We'll start with you. At the end of every week, we close the panel discussion by talking about something we're excited about. What are you excited about?
I'm excited about seeing the innovation that's coming out of businesses right now. I love seeing people pivot in a different way. And I also love seeing how people are coming together and supporting each other more than ever. I see that in our neighborhood around Big Dipper, and it feels good because we're all in it. We all feel like we're all in this together. So, but I'm loving seeing how people are adjusting to it. And the people that do that are the ones that are they're going to be okay.
Awesome. Bryce, you want to take it next?
I'll try and help Susan get out from under the blanket.
Oh, nice.
The key thing to remember is that most of our capacity to produce all of the prosperity that existed 2 months ago has not yet been destroyed.
Right.
And we have the capacity to do things to preserve that capacity so that it can come back to generate that level of prosperity. Now, it's going to be difficult, but we have, speaking of using that possible, it is possible for us to do that. Now, will we? That's what's up in the air, but we have the option to choose it. And the encouraging thing, the thing that I was originally going to talk about before I had to try and mitigate Dr. Doom there, we're seeing that creativity, the creativity that made all that prosperity possible. Charlie just mentioned it in the business community. We're seeing it in the scientific community. I mean, every single week we learn more about what this disease is, how it transmits, how many people it kills, who it kills. And with that kind of information, we will be able to get past this much sooner because we're learning, and we will use the same creativity to go, okay, If it's that, if it transmits largely indoors with lots of congregated people, yada, 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 well, we can figure out how to mitigate that, at least to some degree, to help us keep turning that dimmer in the right direction. And that's kind of what we want to be doing. We want to keep trying to move that dimmer to the right and not to the left, so that we get more of our lights on, more of our prosperity back, more of our freedom back. And, people are working really hard to make that possible. We just got to keep helping them out.
Awesome. Susan, did we turn the dimmer far enough for you to come out of the corner?
Yeah, I'm out. I'm back.
Nice.
I'm taking the blanket off. Let's see, things that have made me happy in the last week. I would say the creativity of both the business and the nonprofit sector, the online courses that we've talked about, but I saw some amazing resources today online from our public library and from Families First, things for parents and kids, homeschooling. I also just saw that Red Ants Pants in White Sulphur Springs. I know that Sarah Calhoun has been on your podcast before, but they are pivoting from producing women's workwear to making PPE and including masks and hospital gowns. And also just remembering to get outside every day. So those are all things that are helping me.
Awesome. Well, I will break the norm and choose something that is decidedly less lofty. I get, I should say precious. I don't know, precious little. I get very little time to watch television, and I don't really choose to watch television all that often. But there's a piece of programming out right now, The Last Dance on ESPN. It's a 10-part documentary about the last season of the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls. I think it was 97, 98. And it's just taken me back to like a chilling time from my youth, where basketball and watching the Bulls was just so thrilling. And it's been really fun to revisit that and consume a little bit of it. It's been out a week, and I've consumed about 40 minutes of the first episode in about 8 different doses. So I'm not getting consistent watching, but I'm thankful for what I have. And I encourage folks that grew up when I did, a lot of our listeners I think did, to check out that content, because it's pretty fun. Yeah.
It gets better too.
Binge watching is better than binge drinking. So I think that's an awesome thing to do.
How are you only 40 minutes in? Like, I watched the 2 hours all in a row and was like, wait a second, I don't get to just keep watching?
Yeah, you're not an employee of the university anymore, Bryce, so you are no longer getting the influx of emails that I get. Yeah. So I hope to get more chances, but not when the weather's like this. I'm going to get outside, and I encourage everybody else to do the same. Bryce, Susan, Charlie, special guest, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Our awesome interns, Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson, Jeff Ament, John Wicks, and VTO for the tunes, and finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.